Welcome back to Rhody Beat Report. My name is Justin Theriault, joined by Emily Lanzarone, Kyle Riel, and Peter Gigliotti. Today we've got a great episode for you today discussing Rhode Island's 24-21 loss at the hands of the Delaware Blue Hens. We have a game reaction and analysis for you all, and then we'll look ahead at UAlbany in that game. We'll also talk about the CAA standings, the FCS playoff check-in, and stay tuned as we're only getting started here on Rhody Beat Report. This past week, the Rhode Island Rams suffered their first FCS loss of the season, ending a 7-game winning streak at the hands of the Delaware Blue Hens. It was a 24-21 loss in favor of Delaware. In the first quarter, Delaware's quarterback had a 1-yard touchdown run. It was Nick Manchucci that got the start. We talked about it last week. We didn't know which one of the three would get the start for them. It ended up being Nick. So he was able to get it done on the ground. And then we also saw the Rams struggle to contain Delaware's run game. There was a 54-yard carry that set up Delaware deep in Rhode Island territory. It was Marcus Yarns who had a fantastic day on the ground for the Blue Hens. On the offensive side of the ball for Rhode Island, it was Marquise Buchanan getting it done early, a 22-yard receiving touchdown from quarterback Hunter Helms, his first as a Rhode Island Ram after the previous 4 seasons at Clemson. This was set up by a forced fumble and recovery by Harold Miles. And then we also saw Devin Hightower recover a fumble and return it for a 21-yard touchdown. So again, Rhode Island is benefiting from defense and special teams touchdowns as they have all season. The Rams fans traveled well this game. If you were at the game, you definitely saw that. And if you watched it on Flow Sports, it was easy to see just how well Rhode Island has really traveled as a fan base this season. In the second quarter, it was Marcus Yarns again for Delaware, another long touchdown run. This time, it was a 27-yard carry that tied this one up at 14 apiece. And then shortly after that, we finally saw some mishaps on the special teams side of the ball for Rhode Island, a missed 42-yard field goal. And then with just 23 seconds left in that first half, we saw Delaware kicker Nate Reed hit a 25-yard field goal that just got inside the right post that made this one 17-14 Delaware going into the half.
Then in the third quarter, wide receiver Jake Thaw for Delaware had a 7-yard touchdown reception, which made the game 24-14 Delaware. And later in the quarter, the Rams had a promising drive set up by a 43-yard catch from wide receiver Marquise Buchanan that, due to a sack, penalty, and incomplete pass, the Rams were forced to punt from the Delaware 35-yard line.
And then heading into the fourth quarter with 6:23 left, wide receiver Greg Gaines III had a 20-yard touchdown catch from quarterback Hunter Helms, making it 24-21 Delaware. And this game really went down to the wire in the fourth quarter. The Rams fell just shy of a safety to start Delaware's second to last drive. It was a fumble that was unable to be recovered deep in the Blue Hens' own territory, which was a missed opportunity by the Rams. Delaware uses 5 minutes of clock, putting the Rams back against the wall to drive downfield with a minute to go, ultimately an interception by Delaware.
As we've had some time to reflect and learn from Rhode Island's second loss of the season to the Delaware Blue Hens, let's turn to our desk for some game reaction and analysis.
Yeah, sadly, Peter, we saw a lot of early season trends return in this one. The Rams were outpossessed nearly 37 minutes to just 23, keeping the defense on the field longer, and the offense was just simply unable to get into rhythm. And that's a big deal at this point in the season, considering how many injuries we've seen on both sides of the ball. It just makes that, depth that we've talked about a lot. Obviously, it's been great for Rhode Island, but there's a reason some of those guys are rotational pieces and they're not out there starting every snap. So when you force the defense to play, 37 minutes, it's just isn't going to be a recipe for success for Rhode Island. And on third down, too, Rhode Island struggled in this one, just 4 of 11, which isn't awful, but when Delaware is, converting 8 of 16 attempts on third down, it just isn't going to get it done for Rhode Island. It was almost 400 yards on offense for Delaware on the day. Rhode Island only managed 300. Again, not a bad number for Rhode Island, but when you look at your counterpart and they're putting up nearly 400 or they're converting their third downs at a 50% rate, you just have to be a little bit better in those areas. And then penalties also loomed large. We already talked a little bit about that one drive that was completely snuffed out by a penalty. But in this one, Rhode Island had 7 penalties, which lost them 62 yards, which, isn't absolutely awful, but when you're playing a team that has 20 more scholarship players than you, a team that is going to move up to the FBS level next year, those little mistakes, those little things, they really do make a big difference. We talked about it in the past. They've gotten away with those kinds of mistakes against other opponents. You just knew they weren't going to get away with those mistakes against an opponent like Delaware.
Mm-hmm. All right, for this one, the ground game really tells the story here. Last week, we discussed the importance of Rhode Island winning their game with the ground game, and on Saturday, the team just couldn't hit the stride. The Rams finished with 89 rushing yards as a team on 24 carries, merely averaging 3.7 yards per carry. Not great. Malik Grant ended the game with 12 attempts for 64 rushing yards, a 5.3 average, and Deion Silas only carried the rock 4 times for 7 rushing yards. Delaware just dominated this ground game. Marcus Yarns with a career-high 174 rushing yards on 23 attempts and a touchdown. Blue Hens averaged 5.3 yards per carry with 230 rushing yards as a team. The offensive line did have a pretty solid performance, though. It wasn't a dominant day on the ground as the line was inconsistent in giving Grant and Silas the holes necessary to break free. But the unit was rather successful in protecting the quarterback. The Rams only gave up 2 sacks against the Blue Hens, albeit they were both in big moments. But the improvement from the interior with guards Dimitri Robinson and Thomas Buxton with another solid game from center Trey Alexander. So we're seeing things on the come up a little bit for this line. Solid but not great games from tackles Brock Sasea and Jacob Oss.
Yeah, I think that for Rhode Island, you can't expect to win a game allowing 200 rushing yards. And Malik Grant obviously had a great day, and he's getting really close to that 1,000-yard mark on the season. He's been fantastic for Rhode Island. The Sacred Heart transfer is everything he was advertised to be. And as for Deion Silas, just no opportunity to really get going. Only 4 carries on the day, and obviously when you fall behind early, you sort of rely on the passing game to get back into it. So it's hard to get Deion going and getting him into a flow when you're just playing from behind. Things just kind of got a little dicey on the ground for Rhode Island, and I mean, we said it last week, they needed to be dominant on the ground game in order to open up the whole field, and unfortunately, that just was another thing Rhode Island could not get going, and they're going to have to find a way to do it next week and keep their playoff chances alive.
Yeah, what worries me the most is that the team is kind of falling back on old habits. This is the thing, you fall the way you lean. If this team falls the way that it's leaning, and that's being inconsistent in the run game, not a lot of availability elsewhere, it's not going to look good down the stretch. But if you can finish out strong against Albany, you can sneak your way into a good spot.
And Rhode Island over the last couple of years, obviously Fleming's been here, Jim Fleming has been here for a while, but in the last couple of years where this program has really started taking off, any game that you watch, whatever it might be, where Rhode Island is dominating offensively, it's 110% because the ground game is on one that day. Now, the quarterback might have a good game. He might finish with 250 passing yards, a couple passing touchdowns. Maybe he won't have any turnovers. But it's always because the running backs are getting the job done. And it's not that the running backs weren't, it's not that they were bad this weekend, but they weren't dominant. The rushing game didn't start off hot, and then, like I've said a couple times already, once you start playing from behind, you start to abandon it. And like you said, Peter, or something I like to say too, is that you fall back on the habits you create, and you just can't, fall back on those early season habits. Not against a team like Delaware. Not when you're trying to, secure a spot in the playoffs.
Yeah, the positive side of that is we've seen this team be dominant on, in the ground game. So you can hope this is just a blip on the radar, then get things going on Saturday against Albany.
And you have to remind yourself, this is an FBS team. This is a Conference USA team. 20 more scholarship players than Rhode Island is allocated. They're barred from being ranked. They're barred from the postseason. They can't win the conference championship. I could go on a huge tangent about the way Rhode Island was dropped in the ratings, the rankings this year. I think everybody is frustrated with the way this team has been perceived by those media outlets and those polls and whatnot. But even then, you remind yourself of those things, that Delaware is, just by definition, by standard, going to be a better team than Rhode Island. Delaware is similar to what Rhode Island would be facing in the postseason. They're similar to those Montana States, those North Dakota States, all, Incarnate Word, all those schools that we talked about last week that we're all, some fans are learning about for the first time, that Rhode Island's going to have to play on a national stage if they get, into the playoffs and then they win some games. So this is a good test for Rhode Island. It's a good thing that they were in it, and it's a really good thing that they were in it when you consider some of the things that they can clean up, whether it's the run game, whether it's the penalties, or whether it's their abilities to convert and prevent third down, plays for the team that they're facing. So, not great, not awful. I think with 2 games left in the schedule, I think Rhode Island still has a good chance to fix a lot of these issues.
Yeah. The defense wasn't perfect either, but kept the Rams in the game. I think Delaware moved the ball well in the first half, but the Rams defense played better down the stretch of this one. They held the Blue Hens to just 187 passing yards, but gave up some passes in key third down situations that just kept drives alive and the unit on the field. There have been some apparent inconsistencies in tackling technique against the run allowed the Blue Hens. This allowed them to carry the ball for chunk plays. I think that was a huge part of the game as well. Nonetheless, there were still multiple standout performers for the Rams defense. Shout out to linebacker Devin Hightower for a fantastic day. 10 total tackles, 0.5 for a loss, 1 fumble recovery, 21 yards for a touchdown, and 2 quarterback hits. That is a crazy stat line, I think, for one game. So huge shout out to him. Outside linebacker Gabe Solomon finished with 5 total tackles, 2 for a loss, and 2 quarterback hits. Linebacker Harold Miles had 2 tackles, including that huge fumble recovery, and cornerback Braden Price with 6 total tackles and a key pass breakup.
Yeah, I think that we talked about earlier in the season, the second level tackling is going to continue to be huge for Rhode Island if their defensive line isn't, able to make a stop against whatever team they might be playing. I mean, down the stretch when we're playing teams as talented as Delaware and you go to the postseason and maybe you play a Stony Brook or something like that, you're going to play a talented offensive line. So you can't expect the defensive line or the front four for Rhode Island to play hero ball all the time. So that second level, third level tackling, it's going to have to shore up. You're going to need to continue to see big games from Price, Hightower, maybe Malay as well. Those guys are going to have to be difference makers against these teams with extremely dominant O-lines.
Yeah.
Just to give you a little refresher on UAlbany's season, the Great Danes come to Kingston following a 24-6 loss to Stony Brook last weekend. They're 3-7 overall with a 1-5 conference record. Their lone wins coming against LIU, Cornell, and Bryant. They're currently on a 4-game losing streak. Those losses include West Virginia, Idaho, Maine, Elon, Delaware, New Hampshire, and Stony Brook. For an FCS team, that's a really hard schedule.
Yeah, I'm reading it.
West Virginia and Idaho. Idaho's an FCS powerhouse.
Basically an FBS school.
Pretty much an FBS school. Last year's
There's 3 FBS schools on there, basically.
Yeah. Last year's CAA co-champions will finish their season next week at home against Hampton. So coming into this game against UArad, you want to hit us with some of their stats?
Yeah, I'll get you with some of those stats. I mean, against a difficult schedule, I don't know what you can expect. Only under 18 points per game right now, and they're allowing 28.5 points a game at their best defensively against the pass, but they struggle in the red zone, giving up 21 passing touchdowns. The run defense is a major issue. For the Great Danes, they give up just under 5 yards a carry. They've been unable to force turnovers this season with just 1 interception. Offensively, the Great Danes throw the ball well, but they're a really inconsistent rushing team. And for individual performance, we'll look at Miles Burkett, their quarterback this season. 10 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, a pretty abysmal 54 percentage on the completion percentage, I should say, and 205 passing yards per game. But Burkett didn't start last week. The split effort between Vander Weaver and Trey Lindsay for them. So once again, Rhode Island's playing an opponent who God knows who they're going to trot out at quarterback. The quarterback question will loom large as to who will get the starting nod for the Great Danes this Saturday. They also utilize 3 different running backs, Jojo Uga, Fasal Aiden, and Griffin Woodell, with Uga leading the unit with 355 rushing yards on the season, 5 rushing touchdowns. So a far away from Natoa, the 20 rushing touchdowns that we saw.
18 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
So then they're led by their senior receiver, Seven McGee, and Levi Wentz, who they combined for 66 receptions and 982 yards. So they got a good duo of receivers, but it's going to be hard to get the ball to them with kind of inconsistent play from the quarterback.
Can I just say one thing? Rhode Island continues to play players with the greatest names in college sports that I've ever seen. This dude's first name is Seven McGee. Continuing on the defensive side, senior linebacker Dante Lunan leads the Great Danes defensive unit with 96 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and a forced fumble. Linebacker Ron Holmes also is in the team top disruptors, 71 tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, and 4 quarterback hits. Pretty good stuff for the Great Danes. For me, though, this game in Meade Stadium is a get-right game for the Rams. I mean, you're coming off of a loss to Delaware. You feel like you could have won that one. There's no better way to get back on track than with a win against an opponent that you should beat.
Now, if you want my, I guess, pessimistic feeling about this one, so Rhode Island, they get their first FCS loss of the season, and the media poll drops them 8 spots, right? And I feel like a lot of people in Rhode Island feel disrespected by that, especially considering we talked about it a lot. Every win, you only moved up 1 or 2 spots. So a loss to essentially an FBS team drops to 8. Well, that's kind of ridiculous. So the way that makes me feel is if Rhode Island doesn't, win this get right game, which I agree with you, Peter. It is a get right game at home against UAlbany, and let's say they do lose. Okay, well then you finish your season with a game against Bryant. Now we will expect them to beat Bryant and finish the season 8-4, but then you'll have finished your conference schedule pretty poorly. And unless some other teams around the CAA like UNH and UMaine and maybe Hampton, right, get some more, get some wins, Rhode Island's strength of schedule is not going to look fantastic. And all of a sudden being, 8-4 or 9-3 or 9-3, right, you feel confident, but not a shoo-in, not uber confident. And you feel, I would feel confident about Rhode Island having to go on the road to play a postseason game, and given FCS postseason rules being that you have to play, they try to make you play a team within 400 miles of you. Likely Rhode Island would then have to play on the road against Stony Brook instead of hosting Stony Brook, the team that really looks like Rhode Island's postseason opponent. Now here's what I'll say, and I'll end it with this. I've been to the Bryan Rhode Island games since I was a kid. I've been to multiple Bryan football games. I'm not a Bryan fan, but they care a lot about this game. This game means a lot to them. They could go 1-11 or 2-10, but if they beat Brown and they beat Rhode Island, then the season was a success. This game means the world to them. There's a reason it's the last game on the schedule. Bryant, well, they haven't been good this season. They're not going to be a pushover. They're not going to be a team you can look past. They're not a team that you might think, okay, so and so is going to be on a snap limit this season because we want him to, or this game because we want him to be ready for the postseason. You can't approach the game like that, because if you drop this game to Bryant and UAlbany, and you finish this season 0-4, and you finish on a 3-game losing streak, best believe this playoff committee that, cut Rhode Island in 2001, cut Rhode Island in 2022, they're practically foaming at the mouth to cut this team. So really this game, in my opinion, is the first of the playoffs for Rhode Island. You have to win this game, then you have to win Bryant, and then you get it. This loss to Delaware, well, not a huge surprise for a lot of people around college football, given that what I've already said, Delaware is a FBS school, not an FCS school. It feels like Rhode Island's being punished for it too harshly, and it feels like if Rhode Island doesn't finish out this season strong, things are going to get dicey for Rhode Island. So you're right, Peter. This is a get-right game, and not only is it a get-right game, it is you must go out there and showcase everything that this team has, from the special teams that have been fantastic all season, from the defense that has created, disruptions in the backfield for the quarterback, that have created turnovers in the last couple of weeks, for an offense that has run the ball really well and has seen some really good quarterback play. All of those things have to come to the forefront for these next 2 games if Rhode Island wants to feel confident about hosting a playoff game and potentially getting in.
Well, if you ever needed an excuse to pop out to Meade Stadium on a Saturday, I don't know how that spirited speech from Justin Theriault cannot get you to go to URI versus UAlbany this weekend.
Hi, I'm Kyle with Rhody Beat Report, and following last week's results, here is where Rhode Island stands in the CAA conference. Richmond is sitting at number 1 with the advantage at 6-0 in CAA play, while Delaware, who's ineligible, URI, Stony Brook, and Villanova all have 1 loss in CAA play. The Spiders' victory over Delaware earlier this season looms large in the grand scheme of things. And now to look at the latest regarding the rest of the FCS playoffs. Off the bat, the polls' disrespect of Rhode Island remains prominent, as the team's strength of schedule continues to harm them in the eyes of the voters. In the Stats Perform Top 25 for the Rams, they fell from 11 to 15 following the loss to the Delaware Blue Hens. In the AFCA Coaches Poll Top 25, the Rams fell from 10 to 15. Thankfully, neither poll is taken into consideration by the playoff committee any longer, as other analytics will be used, such as the Massey rating. Per the latest results, Rhode Island dropped 1 spot from 13 to 14 in the Massey ratings, being a more accurate reflection of the team other than the public polls. The Rams' strength of schedule also improved in the Massey ratings from 45th to 39. This comes in large part due to wins from New Hampshire and Maine. For the Rams, the path to a share of the CAA title in an FCS playoff berth remains clear. Win out versus UAlbany and Bryant, and the rest will fall into place.
Thank you all for tuning in to today's episode of the Rhody Beat Report. This is Emily Lanzarone, joined by Justin Theriault, Kyle Riel, and Peter Gigliotti. Tune in next week as we send the Rhode Island Rams off to face the Bryant Bulldogs in the 2024 regular season finale.